Dr. Paul Howard with us, a PhD doctor who's part of Manhattan Institute and the director of Manhattan Institute Center of Medical Progress. And there's a big article, actually, that came out of the New York Times, Medicare plans to pay doctors for counseling on end of life, which a lot of people, when Obamacare came in the picture, talk about the death panel and whether we're going to advise and counsel people at the end of life. And there was a huge debate. And that's why I invited Dr. Paul Howard to really shed light on this and tell us what's going on. Good morning.
Good morning, Dr. Samadi. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, and I appreciate you being patient online. Tell us what's going on with this article. This sounds like, that whole debate that was coming at the time when Obamacare was becoming hot. Now they're paying us to advise the end of life. Am I reading this correctly?
You are. I think the big concern when the law was being debated, there's another component of the bill. It's called the Independent Payment Advisory Board, Medicare's Independent Payment Advisory Board. We call it IPAB for short. That is supposed to step in with recommendations. It's a little complicated, but basically these would go through unless there was a supermajority in Congress that said don't do this. And the way that the panel is set up would almost inevitably lead to price controls. And the concern was that new treatments for cancer or other diseases that were highly effective would get dinged by this panel, and patients would lose access to them and potentially die sooner because of pure cost rationing. Now, this is, I think, a little bit of a separate issue that I'm a critic of the law, I think a fair one, but I'm not as concerned about this. I think it's appropriate when people face potentially life-threatening illnesses for them to have a discussion with their doctor and say, how do we want this to progress? What are the steps? What are your wishes? In case things go in a direction that we're not, going to say it's going to happen, but we want to be prepared for it if it does happen. And I think if you incentivize physicians to have that conversation and ensure that they're reimbursed for it, it can be a rational conversation. I don't think it's a death panel conversation. It's let's talk about this at a time when you're not so stressed and your family's not so stressed, so we can all have a game plan for going forward.
I think for a lot of people that listen to this program, it would make sense to have that discussion with elderly, because when it comes especially with Alzheimer's and a lot of these chronic diseases, cancer especially, before they actually go for some sort of a procedure, and by the time you get to that point, you have all these procedures, G-tubes and other surgeries that comes in, and then next thing you know is, deciding whether they should go to a nursing home or back to their own home. Having that discussion is probably a smart thing, don't you think?
Absolutely, I agree that is the smart thing. I had my mother passed away due to cancer back in 2009, and looking back on that, I wish we had that conversation, because I think it would have made it much easier on the family, because you're not trying to make those decisions when the person's ability to communicate might be compromised. You don't know what they were thinking or what their wishes would be. So having that ahead of time, I think a lot of people associate palliative care with kind of giving up. So I think that the right way to think about this is the entire journey should be palliative through medicine, not in the sense of surrendering, but in the sense of making choices that ensure that the quality of life is as high as possible at every moment on the journey. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to end terminally. Maybe it just means that we choose choices for chemotherapy, other things that maintain very high quality of life throughout the whole process. So that's the kind of conversation I think physicians and patients should have, and we should be encouraging physicians to have those conversations by reimbursing them for it.